Hello, welcome one and all to the 13th official episode of Dylan Explains Everything. My name's Dylan, and in case you couldn't tell by the title, I'm the one explaining everything, including the topics of today, the catacombs. I'm going to be running through a lot of facts, so if you're curious as to where I get my information, be sure to check the description below for a list of links. Today's episode is episode 13, so I figured I'd talk about something a little more spooky. So the things I'm going to be talking about are a little scary. So what are catacombs? Well, catacombs are basically underground cemeteries where you can house bones and other dead bodies. Like I said, today's episode is going to be very spooky. Now, catacombs are great and all, but a lot of civilizations have used them, so what makes these so special? I mean, even Rome used them in the 1st century when bodies weren't allowed to be buried within city walls, so Jewish and Christian groups started burying them underground. Of course, I want to talk about a specific set of catacombs, specifically the Catacombs de Paris. These catacombs are some of the biggest catacombs in the world, stretching about 200 miles and aren't even completely mapped yet. These catacombs stretch a total of 5 stories underground and house about 6 million sets of human bones. So how did this get the way it is? It all started in the 13th century when limestone miners set up these tunnels in order to mine limestone. Now, this limestone was used for a lot of things and basically made Paris a huge culture hub and made it into the city that it is today. But after they were done mining in areas, there'd just be tunnels sitting there. Until the 17th and 18th centuries, when Paris had a huge problem. All of their cemeteries were full, and this caused a lot of diseases to start spreading amongst the people living around the cemeteries. So the people in charge decided to use their brains and came up with a bright idea. Why not take all these dead bodies and shove them underground in these empty tunnels? In 1786, they started doing exactly that, transferring a lot of the bodies from cemeteries into these tunnels. This went insanely well, and between 1785 and 1787, they ended up emptying out their biggest cemetery, the Saints Innocents Cemetery. Of course, they had to do all of this at night because the nearby locals and churches weren't big fans of this idea. And they just kind of kept doing this. I mean, they started emptying out their cemeteries and giving the bodies to quarry workers who would distribute them throughout the catacombs. And this was working really well. In 1814, though, they had to stop this process because of suppression going on in the cemeteries and multiple revolutions going on in France. They ended up starting up again in 1840, only to stop 20 years later in 1860 because of nearby urban development plans. It turns out the locals weren't huge fans of this idea. However, the locals were very well aware of these, and in 1786 even gave them their official name, the Paris Municipal Ossuary. However, most people just call it the catacombs as a reference to the Roman catacombs mentioned earlier. Not only was it an easy way to get rid of dead bodies, but it was also great for tourism. In 1809, they started allowing official tours in a small part of the catacombs, though obviously this part was nice and renovated and the rest of it was pretty bad. You can actually still take a tour of the catacombs if you want, about a mile of them, though the rest of the catacombs are pretty hard to get into for a tour legally. And by that I mean impossible. It is completely illegal to explore the non-tour parts of the catacombs. And even if you did, you'd probably die very quickly. With things like diseases because of the dead bodies, lack of light because of no nearby exits, and freezing cold weather down there, you can expect to die from freezing, malnutrition, dehydration, or just getting lost from not having enough batteries and a flashlight. However, the Catacombs of Paris remain a huge part of Paris's history even to this day, and even recently French resistance fighters and German soldiers have used the catacombs in World War II. So, think you've heard about these catacombs before? Well, you probably have. There's a video that got really popular making its rounds on the internet of a man who's exploring the catacombs. The video was anything but happy though. The video starts out with a man with a GoPro on his forehead walking through the tunnels, not really going at a big pace. But after a while he starts moving faster and faster, looking around to see if anyone's behind him, hearing weird noises, until eventually he's running through the tunnels, encountering secret symbols, until he eventually just takes the camera off and throws it on the ground. The camera was then found by a group of people called the cataphiles who explore the catacombs illegally in search for things like this camera. The footage was actually part of a documentary that was made a little while later, but before I get into that, I feel like I should say something. Earlier, when I told you you'd probably die if you went into the catacombs, I wasn't just saying that theoretically. People go into the catacombs illegally all the time, and they end up missing or years later found dead. The camera footage and the catacombs themselves were talked about in that documentary I mentioned before. And there's a group of people who even tried to figure out where the man who filmed the video went to after he dropped the camera. Though they ended up getting lost in the catacombs for a full day. There are multiple theories as to what happened to the man in the video. Some people say it was completely fake, made by the people who made the documentary so they could make money. Other people say that he found something he wasn't supposed to, and that the engravings on the wall and the sounds in the background were actually someone hunting him down. But the most common theory is he got lost and died. To this day, very little is known about the man in the video, and we don't even know if he's alive or not. There's very little information to actually go off of on who he was. Of course, Paris is just one set of catacombs. There's gotta be more in the world, right? Well, it turns out there's one set of catacombs that's even bigger than the ones in Paris. They stretch 1,500 miles, are not completely mapped, and are the largest ones in the entire world. It's in Ukraine, specifically the city of Odessa. Now, very little is known about these catacombs, other than the fact that they were made in the 1800s in order to mine limestone, and sometime between then and now, they were used to store dead bodies. Of course, much like the ones in Paris, these ones were used as a hideout for multiple gangs, criminals, rebels, and soldiers. But some good did come from these tunnels. In World War II, after the Soviets were pushed out of the city, they left multiple soldiers there, right under the noses of the enemies. They passed time by cooking, playing chess or checkers, and listening to the radio. But they had some huge problems, including malnutrition and the big problem of having malaria. Of course, every once in a while they got to blow up a German base, even though the Germans were closing them in by closing off the exits, and they ended up having gas thrown at them that was trying to poison them out. But they still survived for a long time, pretty much the entire war. Like I mentioned before though, multiple criminals used the tunnels for smuggling and ended up even making more tunnels of their own in order to have more exits and secret hideouts in there. Of course, with anything like that, there's going to be a group to find these. The group, made in 1961, was called The Search, and was led by a guy named Konstantin Pronin of the Paleontological Museum of OSU. They started researching these tunnels, mapping them out, and finding historical sightings in them. Of course, now it's become a subculture of the people living in that area to form groups to search down there, and there's even been competitions between the groups to search down there. Of course, having the world's biggest set of tunnels be right under the noses of a bunch of neighborhoods isn't the greatest idea, and oftentimes people in that area end up going missing or have their children or pets going missing. In the case of a person or child going missing, an entire search will be launched by a bunch of the groups mentioned before, who will ignore their differences and set aside the competitions in order to find this person. This is very different from the Paris catacombs, where if someone is lost, they're lost forever. In 1995, for the 200th anniversary of the city, someone broke the world record for the longest amount of time spent in the catacombs, spending 27 hours in there and walking a total of 40 kilometers. Shortly after this, an unmapped part of the catacombs, known as K29, started getting explored by the groups. Of course, these people aren't just mapping tunnels all day. Sometimes they even find a weapon cache full of weapons and ammos from the war. And once every couple of years, they end up finding the body of someone who used to live down there. But before you start grabbing your gear and getting ready to go down there, I must remind you, the catacombs are not safe. In 2005, to celebrate New Year's, a group of teens went into these catacombs. While they were there, one of the girls who was with them, named Masha, got lost and separated from the group. Masha ended up dying of dehydration 3 days later, and her body wasn't found until 2 years later by the police, who found her in the cold, dark catacombs. The point of the story is, unless you know what you're doing, it's not safe to go down there. Also, unlike the Catacombs of Paris, the Catacombs in Odessa are perfectly legal to explore on your own. Of course, there is a small part that's officially open for tours. You can actually go into any part of it if you want to. Of course, if you want to explore the unofficial part with a tour guide, you can hire one separately. It might be a bit more expensive, but they will do it. You just have to give them the right amount of money for the amount of people there, how long you're going to be down there, how far you're going to travel. The point I'm trying to make is the catacombs are a really cool place, and they're very important in history, and if explored properly, they can be very cool to visit, but you have to do it with someone who knows what they're doing. Whether you think the catacombs are cool, creepy, or just plain stupid, they are very important to history of both of these cities and in modern history such as World War II when a lot of soldiers were using them. With all that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, be sure to let me know and stay tuned for next week's video, which always comes out on Saturday at 10 a.m. If you have any thoughts, questions, or suggestions about the video, let me know in the comments down below. And remember, my name's Dylan, and I explain everything.